and welcome to this week's RuneScape podcast. I'm Mod Matt He, your podcast monkey, and today we're straight across to Law Corner with Mod Osborne.
Hello and welcome to the Law Corner, a bit like a fruit corner but with more story, more intellectual people like Mod Rowley and Mod Stu, but no Mod Raven. There's no Mod Raven this time. What are we going to do?
I was about to make an inappropriate joke, but I shan't. Let's crack on.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Dragonkin. Should we give that a go?
Yeah.
No.
No would be the answer.
Karapak says no. Now, the Dragonkin, I actually found it tough forming a script for this because I was trying to figure out where we started with the Dragonkin, which was some time ago with Paul's, I would say probably Robert the Strong content. So we're talking kind of cat content.
Tale of Two Cats.
Tale of Two Cats.
Don't know if that was the first name drop, but yeah. I think it was the first time we saw them.
So if you're a lore enthusiast, please get hold of us and tell us if it was earlier than that. But certainly not in earnest. And the first sight of a Dragonkin was Tale of Two Cats. And I know that whenever I've talked to Mod Mark, it's been Skeksis from Dark Crystal has been the kind of the reference point. So I know he was kind of working with Paul on forming the Dragonkin. So if you don't know these guys, they're the kind of bad guys in the Dark Crystal Jim Henson movie.
Certainly in terms of look, I mean, they had that whole hunched vulture, really ancient looking. But the kind of the thing that defines Dragonkin is somewhat unique. Somewhat unique.
Oh, you've just broken your own rule.
Much.
It's very unique. It's crazily unique.
Is unique to RuneScape, I believe.
Yeah.
The Skeksis themselves don't have the same sort of rules that Dragonkin do they?
And what were those rules? I mean, just for those who don't know.
You'll have to remind me, to be honest. Dark Crystal is really old.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a long time since I've seen it.
No, it's fine. So originally, I think they were just the kind of malevolent force that people didn't know much about. It was kind of a mysterious, ancient, very powerful force that kind of kept to the shadows, but only one person has ever really been known to have killed, so that's Robert the Strong. I don't really know if there was anything beyond that. So it's very much the kind of the George and the Dragon.
There was the whole connection with dragon metal items.
Yes.
Saying that they were forged by the Necrocertes.
Yeah.
In fairy content, I think. And I think that was the main connection beyond those things you just stated.
Yeah. But I think it's just a perfect example of how story was generated like a long time ago. It wasn't that there was, page after page of kind of reference material on our Confluence pages and, our story Bible. It wasn't as if there was loads of lore councils and lore developers like there are now. It was just Paul dropping in a few things that he quite liked the sound of. And eventually those all coalesced into what we're working with now. And the start was that these were just kind of dragon humanoids that kind of hid in the shadows and probably had a wilderness fortress of some kind. But they really kind of started to come to the fore probably with Ritual with Madrat, would you say? That's when it's kind of stepped up a little?
Yeah, to the fore, certainly. I mean, we've certainly dropped lots of hints, say with the release of Demonheim.
Yeah.
With the architecture on the surface being inspired by Dragonkin.
Yeah.
And there are some little hints in there too, like the floor patterns and things like this.
Yeah, that's it. We started seeing those around.
Where they
effigies.
First started to make their kind of mark on the story of the game.
Started getting kind of named Dragonkin, heard them talk properly, outside of a kind of a singular cutscene from the...
Not that it was pronounceable, so it was a good job we weren't doing VO at that time. was it Stifath?
That was Paul's point was that they were meant to be like a force of nature. They weren't meant to be individuals. They were just an angry force. And then determinedly, they had names, but they were all very similar, so you could confuse them. And that was on purpose because they weren't individuals, they were a group. And then, of course, now we're getting to the point where we're starting to form them into Necrocertes and Dactyl. They're starting to become individuals because Karapak is talking and things like that. So it's slightly kind of diverging from that. Now it's becoming really irritating that they've all got really similar names as Strisath and
I think we've started to give some... it was Wild Graphic Sleeps, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was the Satendeth, the forests in Musdahamus. That was the first sighting. Yeah. And it was, I can't remember which one it is, but the one that's now become the comedy one.
The one that keeps on getting
always captured and put in
Yes,
in
exactly.
jails.
Yeah.
So he's got a personality at least. And there've been other...
It's characteristic, I guess.
Other interesting names like that have that kind of Dragonkin feel, like Calibath and Forsyth, I believe
4K.
it's 4K.
Yeah, that was a bit of an awkward one actually, because they're meant to have hard consonants to the words, but we had to name it after a player, Dragon Forsyth. Had that name
I
dropped.
suppose we didn't need
dragons.
to make it a Dragonkin, but it felt appropriate.
Yeah, well, it was as a way to tie him into the environment and that seemed to fit the lore.
Yeah.
And then, it happened to be beneficial that he had the name Dragon Forsyth. It seemed to write itself as a word, but
Absolutely.
it meant that we have to pronounce the C as a K.
Yeah.
Close enough.
But we're certainly determined to make more of them as characters and to give them unique approaches to their issue, which is tying to the Stone of Jazz. I think this is another thing that has developed over time, which is, I know talking to Paul originally, he felt, his original thought was that the Dragonkin were creations of the Elder Gods.
There was talk of something, I remember from his notes, at least those notes that existed, of something called a soul prison.
Yes, yeah, and I think there was a couple of mentions in game of the soul prison. And that was, oh gosh, we should have done our homework before this one, shouldn't we?
It was, effectively, it was the spiritual force of the Dragonkin that were trapped within the stone, or, by the stone, not necessarily physically within it. And they were manifested as they were needed, basically, and then they went back to that.
Yeah, that's it. Almost like summoning creatures, summoning familiars. You're dragging them from the spirit realm and then chucking them back. The Soul Prison was like that for Dragonkin.
Or a localized underworld.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That seems to echo the Elder Kin too, in some respects. These creatures that are spawned out of it and then return to the source.
Certainly it's a theme that's running throughout RuneScape, and it's been picked up on, like the concept from Paul's notes.
Yes.
But the Dragonkin themselves have taken a bit of a different path.
Yeah, I like that we've moved away from them being actual creations, like formed out of the sacred clay of planets, whatever you want to call it. That I feel like the Sar and the Tokar feel appropriate, as a creation from a kiln. They feel like they are formed out of the, this kind of primordial rock. But the Dragonkin felt more complex than that. They felt like they had a history and that we could use that history. And that's where we've moved away from that. They were actually, it was more of a curse, that they were tied to the Stone of Jazz as a reaction to something, which we'll probably explore more.
I think that was one of the drivers that made us want to make them unique and special snowflakes. And I think it was, again, we're going back to the whole, it was around the time of the World Wakes thing.
Yeah.
Where we determined that they were the sole surviving race from the previous iteration of the universe.
That's it, that previous revision. Yeah.
And wanting to keep them special in that regard by there being no other races in
You're absolutely right.
In that way.
Yeah. And that allows us, that gives us so much story space. You don't have, you can obviously start imagining some stories. We're not necessarily going to do them, but what happened to the Dragonkin they might have left behind? What was it like in a previous revision? Can we ever go there? I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to do those quests or storylines, but it's certainly opportunities for us. I'd love to sit down and chinwag with the Dragonkin about their previous revisions. That'd be pretty cool. There were some things that we abandoned. I noted it down here. I wasn't sure whether or not to mention it, but I feel like we could. There was a point where, when we were talking about the raptor's identity.
Oh, yeah.
That we really liked the idea of the raptor being a Dragonkin, which obviously is a revelation. We never mentioned this before. This isn't the direction we've gone with the raptor, but it was because it was appropriate. It felt like the raptor was killing for some reason. It felt almost arbitrary, but if he had this kind of need to kill, the rage that the Dragonkin feel, and he is fighting individuals, to overcome that rage.
I was never convinced by that, just because he'd have had to squish his snout to
the
get
snout
that helmet on.
fit. Yeah, the feet. I think there was this, I always had this kind of cinematic moment of the reveal where these wings suddenly go shing out of the back of his armour and he flies off and everybody goes, where?
And his snout inflates like a balloon.
But I think we've got something more appropriate for that with the raptor. Anyway, the Dragonkin are now moving one of the pillars of our 6th Age storyline. It's changed subtly. We were going to tell those 3 pillars concurrently, so Sliske's Endgame, the Elder Gods, and the Dragonkin, what's happening to the Dragonkin, but it feels we're moving more to the Dragonkin as the story that we're telling after a lot of the storyline we're telling now. I think that's appropriate because otherwise we're just spinning too many plates at once. We'll get to it eventually. But that has led to us forming 2 groups, the Necrocertes and the Dactyl. Do you want to tell us a bit more about why we did that? Do you remember?
I know some reasons. I'm not sure if I should say them.
Well, we're not quite there yet, are we?
The reasons why, right? So reasons why we did it.
Yeah.
Conflict is good.
Yes.
It generates dramatic tensions.
Yeah.
We had some kind of conflicting older lore, and it was a nice way to shore this up, to say, well, it's all Dragonkin related, but there are these two factions, so which faction?
Yeah. It could easily have just been another world-ending force, which is exactly where the Dragonkin are going.
Yeah.
That we had to defeat a world-ending force, and there's not many shades of grey there.
But then we
explore.
started to see themes within, say, the Tsar and Tokar that Stu had started to build on, and the whole thing with the Dragon Riders and their infertility.
Yeah.
So this
again split in two, the Godless split in two. You could see these kind of.
So it's another way to
driving a
explore
wedge.
that. I mean, there are very subtle differences between these things.
Yeah. With the dactyl, I mean, that's allowed us to explore something that was only very barely touched on in the early days of Dragonkin, which is that Dragonkin created the dragons.
Yes.
And so why were they creating dragons? And that was when we were doing World Wakes. It made sense that they were creating the dragons because they were researching a way of reproducing, a way of basically producing more Dragonkin that weren't tied to the Stone of Jazz. And then we kind of drove down into that, and then that creates Kerapak and a lot of the histories of the dragons, a lot of what you're talking about with the Rune Dragons and Adamant Dragons and Forkai.
But we still had to have that more primal force that would go off and kill gods and false users.
Yeah. And working with one of those two factions, how that might tie in with storylines like Zaros. We've got some great ideas for what's going to happen with the future of the Dragonkin storyline, to be honest. And there's always the joy of writing for Kerapak. I know Mod Raven's not here, but he got to write Kerapak, and I think there's something about writing for a character who just shuts down the player. There's some joy in that, I think. Would you like to write Kerapak?
It would certainly be easy to.
Yes. This monosyllabic kind of like, no, I'm sorry.
I prefer to just quote him.
Yeah. Just got that stock kind of JPEG that you just put into your kind of Twitter chat whenever you need it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Kelpie uses that all the time. It's pretty much how he acts on the sofa during live streams.
We could just replace him during the Ninja Quickfire. Just put Kerapak there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a triumph of characterization, though. We had these Dragonkin, which were previously quite interchangeable, and he's managed to establish one that has a unique character and personality.
Yeah, he was also albino as well. Did we make him albino?
Yeah, I don't know if it was determined in the albino, but certainly that very much pale. I think it was when we're talking about why.
This case of the white dragons as well, wasn't it?
Yes, the white dragons really ties into that. It felt like it was part of his blood, but I know that we were joking that it's the typical typecasting, the nerd who stays in and kind of researches things, doesn't get out much, and therefore has paler skin. But I'm sure that's inappropriate and impolitically correct. But yeah, and just to round out, I guess, the Dragonkin, you were talking earlier to me before the podcast about Planet Aya. So this is the Dragon Rider planet.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is not necessarily canonical. So
yeah, still in discussion.
It's just things that Raven and I have discussed in the past when he was working on One of a Kind. And it was the idea that the planet Aya is also from the previous cycle and was the homeworld of the Dragonkin.
Yeah.
And it was just left untouched by the older gods because there's the whole thing with Mar and what's starting to go wrong with her.
Yeah.
So I think there is some mention in Fate of the Gods about Aya, about Mar, something happening at that point.
Yeah.
And we kind of like the idea that the Dragonkin and the Dragon Riders, they're connected in more
ways than you previously thought. That there's almost this kind of fated,
and that they're kind of like a second, not generation, but like the new species of the new cycle that kind of fits that role in this particular universe.
Interesting. Okay.
Lots of rubbish.
Lots of lore rubbish. Yeah. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed listening to us ramble. Perhaps the Raven will be back next week. Let's see.
I bet he won't be.
Sorry?
I bet he won't be.
I bet he won't be. I know. He's a slacker like that. Thank you very much for listening to us. And do come next week for Godless and the Anima Mundi.
And so now I have Mod Pie with me here to talk about his favourite piece of RuneScape music. Hi, Mod Pie.
Hello.
So what is your favourite piece of RuneScape music?
My favourite piece of RuneScape music is quite an old one. It's called Harmony.
Right.
The reason why it's my favourite is because if I think about one music track that when I was little, when I was playing RuneScape, that just instantly, the second I hear it, I get like memories and flashbacks of playing RuneScape. It's Harmony.
So which version of Harmony?
That's a really difficult question, because obviously the first version of Harmony, if we're harking back to, you know, what reminds me of, you know, my days going through Lumbridge, leveling up, like chopping the trees between Lumbridge and Draenor and killing the goblins around there.
Yeah.
But then, like, I actually quite like the newer versions as well. Like, I like the reworked version of Harmony we have in the RuneScape 3. But I also really, really like the viola part of Second Harmony.
Yeah.
Just because the viola is a very emotive instrument, and Harmony itself like breeds a lot of emotions in me because of all of the memories I get. So you kind of multiply those two, you know, like I don't actually well up, but it gets close, you know. So it means it's just that piece of music for some reason just
really strikes a chord with you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it brings back so many awesome memories of when I was younger.
Okay, so we'll listen to Harmony with various of its variations. Those really are great pieces of music. And now we're across to player support with Mod Infinity to talk about scams.
Hello and welcome to the latest segment of our customer support podcast. I'm Mod Infinity. I'm joined here by Mod Steve W and Mod Sween. And today we're going to be talking about scamming in RuneScape, but more specifically how you can prevent being scammed or the actions we're taking against scammers and how it has an impact on the community in general. So Mod Sween, I guess the first question is kind of what is the history of scamming in RuneScape? You've been playing for quite a while, so if you can talk to us about that, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm a long-term player, and over the years I've seen lots of different scams. Everybody knows the classic free armor trimming scam, the free gem cutting, a few other ones as well. So you're putting a rope up if you're trying to sell a whip, so you note the rope and it look like a whip, or selling Willow logs or Magic logs, and you'd get the player to come to a German server, changing the K to a 4 at the end. So say you were buying an item for 7.4 mil, so 7,400K, you'd change it to 7,400,04, and it would kind of look like the K still.
Right, okay.
Just a bit of deceit like that.
So we've had obviously changes to the trading window and the way that we interact with each other in game when it comes to trading, and we've got the kind of exchange and all that kind of stuff. And so most of that stuff you've talked about has kind of been removed from the game due to the content changes or the way we've kind of educated players on the various different scams. And so in terms of item scamming today in RuneScape, what's happening and what do we know?
Well, the stuff you see every day, and it's the really low-level stuff like doubling and begging and kind of trade me, you won't regret it. And people know what they're doing, and you try and scam the scammer, or you're just trying to test the waters, like see someone offering to double. You know we're not going to double it, but you give them 20K anyway just to see. So then you can say, hey, look, you scammed me. And generally just trust trades in general. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's the kind of thing we always fall back on. Probably you're going to hear quite a lot over the rest of this podcast. Yeah. So the important thing with these scams is that it's really annoying. You hate to see it kind of in a GE or around Prif. It's being spammed a lot, but nobody is losing their bank over it. So the important thing is to just report it and don't fuel it. If you want to test the waters, just don't bother. Just report and ignore and kind of move on with your playing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense to me, and I think that's some sound advice there. So that's kind of the low-level scamming you've touched upon there, but we kind of know there's some kind of high-level, really organised scamming going on, which are, groups of people and individuals who don't really play RuneScape the way it's intended to be played, but they go in game deliberately looking to scam people and then, sell that gold for real life money or whatever they do with it. So, Steve, I know you've been looking at how we can tackle that, on our end, and it'd be great if you could talk about that for us.
Yeah, so we've put a bit of focus on this because, as you quite rightly say, there are organised people that are actually, they're not playing RuneScape, they're just set out to do one thing, which is to scam and lure, really high value items, things like party hats. Yeah. Which is obviously, devastating for the person that loses that item. They've played probably for years and spent hundreds of hours, to get that item, and when they lose it, it's obviously has a huge impact on them. So we've been looking at that, and they're quite nasty, really, these organised teams. There's probably 3 or 4 people involved in it. Mm-hmm. They're probably speaking to each other on a team speak or off-site where they're sort of organising themselves and identifying who their victim is, who they should try and lure, what they should do. They kind of follow scripts, so they have sort of quite authentic sounding sort of things they'll say to people, right, that they try to come across that they're your friend, that they're trying to help you. There's a kind of fake anti-lure thing going on, which is basically where one of the scammers will try and lure someone with a fairly well-known and obvious scam. Mm-hmm. Something like a Grand Seed pod, try and offer you that, and most players will know that will teleport you away. Then one of the other scammers will actually engage you in conversation and pretend to be your friend and say, look, that guy's trying to scam you. As long as you don't click on that seed pod, you'll be okay. That's what he wants you to do. Actually, we can scam the scammer here. We'll split the proceeds of this. And actually, right, they're in on it. They're in with the scammer, and actually they're trying to sort of distract you from, you're very focused on, won't click on the seed pod, but actually, that takes your focus away from something else that they're actually doing that's actually going to get the item off you. So, they're actually in it together. It's really quite sort of deceitful what they're doing. And so, we kind of looked at that and said, what can we do about it? And there's sort of a few things that we've looked at and some work that we're doing because, we want to disrupt these people. As you say, a lot of the money that they get, the in-game wealth ends up with real world traders. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously not good, not healthy for the game. And it's the devastation it causes as well. That's really the thing. We see it every day, and it gets us as much as it gets the people involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly sounds quite severe and very serious. And as you say, the people who are often victims of these scams are really veterans, right? And they've been playing for over a decade, and they've got a really invested account, and for them to lose a party hat, really high value items, that's often the end of their gameplay, right? It's the end of their experience with RuneScape, and they're going to leave. And so naturally, we have a vested interest to stop this kind of high level organised scamming happening. But as you say, it sounds quite complicated. It sounds quite sophisticated, and these guys are often talking off-site using Skype or TeamSpeak to organise this. And so what are we doing to tackle this, and how can we tackle it, Steve?
So we've been working with our PMod team. So that, PMods are fantastic. They're really passionate about it. They don't want to see people lose their things. They want to see scammers dealt with. And they give us a lot of sort of tip-offs and advice and suggestions of things that we can do. And also we have our own data science team internally that produce reports for us, and we can actually identify where really high value things have been dropped. and where that's been traded between accounts. We can then track those trades, see where all that money's ended up, and it normally ends up with a real world trader.
Yep.
Importantly, if the person that scammed has reported it, that gives us some additional evidence that we can look at, and we'll basically ban these scammers, the people they're talking to, the people involved in it, the real world trader they're passing the money to. So we kind of identify every day where these really high value items have changed hands, normally through some sort of lure or scam, and then we'll take them out of the game. And we'll also look at their kind of linked accounts as well. So very often they're doing the luring or scamming on a throwaway low level account they don't actually care about. We'll actually invest some time and effort into identifying the main and making sure that gets dealt with as well.
Yep.
And then, of course, the other thing people will notice is that we recently made a change where any noted item or stacks of items that are worth more than 1 billion GE price, they can't be dropped anymore. So, people might think, well, look, if you earn a party hat, how on earth do you drop it on the floor? You're just stupid. Mm-hmm. But actually, as I've sort of explained previously, they're kind of quite complicated, involved techniques that the lurers use where they kind of distract you. Mm-hmm. And you think you're actually going to do quite well out of this, and it's kind of that deceit that's used to get these items. So people do this. We see it every day. A number of party hats get dropped on the ground every day and passed to a scammer and lurer. Not anymore, because we've made the change to the 1 billion drop. We're always looking at things we can do to change, make things better, things like that. Little content changes are always good. Mm-hmm. Yes, people can let us know about that. Post on the forums or post on Reddit and let us know suggestions you've got to tackle scamming, particularly if it's something like that that's quite simple, quick, easy to do, and actually has a big impact. So that's something we've done in RuneScape main, and we're continuing to do, looking at the drop reports every day. And then we've also sort of got some meetings lined up with the old school team, and we can't talk too much about that yet because it's still in the very early stages. But, we're aware that obviously there's very different values in old school, so you can't sort of apply a 1 billion drop, for example. But we're looking with the old school team to see if we can make some content changes or some fairly simple patches that will actually stop some of the common everyday lures that go on in old school.
All right, sounds really good. And I think, from my perspective, there's loads of teams involved, right? There's teams inside Jagex, like ourselves in customer service, and our data science team, and actually content teams as well, who are making changes to content to help prevent those common scams. But also, people outside, so the wider community in general who's submitting those abuse reports to us, giving us the evidence that we can investigate. But, I want to echo what you said about our PMods, right? A dedicated team of people who are giving us tip-offs, providing us with that kind of information and those mute reports, which help us tackle that high level organized scamming. So you mentioned, Steve, about the 1 billion drop. So the changes we've made very, very recently. Mm-hmm. So players can't drop any items which are worth over 1 billion GE value. I guess my question, and some of the kind of comments I've seen on social, on the forums, is why stop at 1 billion? Why not go down to 500 million, 400 million, 300 million? What's the process?
Yeah, I mean, we did think about the level and the value that should be there, and we've set it quite high to start with because we do want to get the high level scamming out of the game. But we did do a bit of sort of analysis as well, and it's all about really the effort and reward ratio. If you think about the people that are actually involved in this luring and scamming, they want to sell that item to a real world trader to get money. Yeah? So now we're not involved in these circles, and we don't actually know, their conversations and actually what's going on. But from what we can see, we think about 1 in 10 times that they try to do things, they'll have a success. So 9 people will tell them to, disappear, and they're not interested when they're asking them to drop an item. And there's generally about 3 people involved in the scam. So, when they're trying to get something like a party hat through a drop, it would probably take them about 1.5 hours to actually do that. Right. Particularly when you take into account that they've got to launder the money through other accounts, break it down, maybe get involved in the dual arena to try and transfer the money, to try and disguise what they're doing before they send it to a real world trader and stuff like that. And then, of course, when they do sell that money, it's got to be split between the 3 people that were involved. And there's quite a bit of honour among thieves. They do tend to split it because they need to keep that team going to do future sort of scamming. So actually, when you kind of split that reward out between 3 people over that 1.5 hours or so they've put into getting it, if you now say that, well, look, if you halve that to 500 million, so the situation now is that they'd have to do that with an item, say 500 million, because they can't drop 1 billion. So that means they've got to do double the amount of effort. Now, they're still going to get the same proportion of people telling them that they're not going to drop the item. So they've got to put double the time in to get the same reward, the same amount of items they can sell to real world traders. And when you divide it up between the 3 people, the time it takes, it's just no longer worth it. So, I mean, that's why we kind of picked the 1 billion. Well, look, we consider dropping it, but obviously we want to be aware of clans want to drop things to each other. That's a particular important part of gameplay. There are wealthy players that do want to have sort of high value drop parties, and we don't want to sort of interfere with that. The beauty of the 1 billion is it doesn't really impact on anyone apart from scammers. But yeah, we're open to looking at it, and it's something we might tweak if we can do it without impacting on too many people. But for now, it seems to be hitting hard and doing what we intended.
All right, fantastic.
So you might think, well, it's all very well talking about this, but does it actually make any difference? And I know that Mod Sween's been keeping an eye on some of the numbers, some of the impact that we're having with the scamming stuff. And so, Sween, you got some figures to share?
Sure, yeah. So using the BR reports mentioned earlier by Steve, we've started an initiative which targets high-value item scamming. So this is something I've been working on. I've been supported by ModCake. So essentially, we're identifying high-value scams and then targeting, perm banning the people responsible for it. There's lots of investigative work involved. So additionally to the banning, if we see an account hijacked and used for it, we'll secure it. If we see the GP's been transferred to some sort of mule, then we'll forward that to ICU for further investigation. So then we can target the mass creation tools they're using. Since we've began the reporting, there's 206 accounts have been banned for a total of over 310 billion of wealth in items and GP.
Wow.
And some really top level accounts involved as well. So for example, there was a maxed account with over 30 bill on that account. So lots of rares, lots of gold, lots of other items. Another account, which is quite interesting, was a maxed account, 14 years old with over 725 days played. So really invested account. Unfortunately, they seem to have fallen to the dark side. They've started scamming, but they're not safe from it. We'll still ban them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the important thing here is we don't discriminate here between members, free players, long-serving players, veterans, throwaway accounts. If you're involved in scamming and luring, if it's high level, if you're literally ripping people's banks away and destroying their gameplay and their enjoyment of RuneScape, you're out of our game.
Oh, that's a strong message. Thank you, Steve and Mod Sween. So it sounds like it's been really, really successful so far from the stats you've just read out there. Just to kind of recap on the things you've talked about. We're aware that historically there's been some really low-level scamming in RuneScape. The majority of those scams are now gone and they're not being used anymore. However, we are aware of things like doubling money and trust trades which are happening in the Grand Exchange, and absolutely they're important to us because we know the community dislikes seeing that, and what our advice is report it to us, ignore those players, and rest assured that our teams are looking into that. And we will apply temporary mutes and eventually remove those players out of our game if they're being persistent. But, use common sense. Don't give a stranger your money. It's very unlikely, that they're going to double it for you for nothing at all. In terms of high-level scamming, well, Steve, you've spoken about the different tools and the teams we're working with internally at Jagex and our PMods to tackle that and report on it. And Sween, you've obviously just mentioned there that we've recently started an initiative to tackle that high-level scamming, and we're starting to take out the big players involved in that organised group. So what's left is my question, I guess. So, Mod Sween, can you tell us what you've noticed still and what we're tackling still?
Sure. So there's still some scams that have been here since the kind of dawn of RuneScape, and that's anything involving combat. I mean, back in the day, it would simply be to follow me, I'll give you something, and I'll lead you to the wilderness. Obviously, there's no wall, no ditch, just you'll enter the wilderness and I'll kill you. Well, now that's changed, and there's multiple avenues for it. Kind of fake teammates. So they'll offer to partner with you if you're PvPing, and then they'll backstab you. They'll kill you for your items. Scams involving the purple portal. So again, they'll try and lure you into the purple portal. It's a dangerous portal to, again, try and get your items. They'll befriend you and then ultimately betray you. And then kind of abyss scamming. So essentially, we know the abyss is a really good place to train combat quickly. Some people will offer to kind of buy your spot because it's hard to get a good spot there. So many people are using it. And then to do that, they'll take you out of the wilderness and then there'll be a team waiting to kill you. So again, all of these involve people befriending you, offering you good stuff, and then betraying you.
Okay, so sounds like to keep your wits about you, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So another one we're seeing is name impersonation, usually involving clans and kind of really distinctive people in these clans. So anyone kind of like, you exchange an L for an I in a name. So the name looks similar. They'll pretend to be that person that maybe a clan leader, someone you respect and trust. And then they'll try and get you to give them items. This is easily avoided simply by looking at the account. Is it already on your friends list? Look at the clan chat. Is it actually got an icon? Is it ranked in the clan? And just look at the levels. I mean, you have to see them in person to give them stuff. So make sure, is this person level 40 and you expect them to be max or something like that? Yeah. Just do detective work before you give away your items.
Okay, cool. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, a couple for me. I think tab scamming, which is something that people are probably aware of, and this is where someone engages you in a trade, in a conversation. They want to buy a high-value item off of you, so a Halloween mask or something like that, knock stuff, dies, whatever. And actually, they're kind of offering you quite a good price. Sounds like a quite good deal. You're going to get more money out of this than you would just selling it on the G or so. And then what the other player does is basically says that it's another account or a friend or a main account that's actually on the same world but in a different part of the map location, and they'll offer you a teleport tab so that you can go and meet this other account and complete the trade. Now, what they're actually trying to do here is you're showing them your valuable item. Let's say it's Halloween mask. That's in the trade window. They offer you a tele tab to take you to where this other account is, and they hope that you don't realise that actually the trade you're offering is your valuable item for a tele tab, and you'll complete that trade and then effectively swap your valuable item for a tab. And they're just hoping that you don't notice that because they're distracting you in the chat by saying you need to go and meet my friend on my main account somewhere else. So just be aware of that. I mean, there are warnings in the trade window. That's why it's there. I think they're playing on the fact that they're offering you a good deal, so they're hoping you're going to quickly kind of accept it and move on because you want to complete this trade. You're getting a good deal for your item you're selling. But yeah, just always watch those trade windows. And the other thing we've noticed is people asking other players to buy things on the GE. They normally say they've reached a limit on certain items or something like that. And, it does genuinely go on. People do want to do that. I mean, I've bought battle staffs for people and things like that because there is a fairly low limit on it. But, sometimes people are just trying to get you to buy something they're actually selling, a low value item that they're selling at a high price in the GE. They work on the pretense that they're going to, once you've purchased from the GE, they're going to buy them off from you at a good price. But actually, you just complete the trade in the GE and buy their, effectively very low value things for a high price. And then they just log out, walk away or laugh at you and just say, call you stupid or something like that. Just make you feel even worse about it, lose the money, and they kind of rub a bit of salt in the wound as well. So, I think, look, if it's your really good friends, people and then they're just genuinely trying to buy a few extra things that reach a limit, you're probably going to be okay. But, always have caution. If it's someone you've never met, someone you've never seen before, someone you don't know, and they're just suddenly asking you to buy, huge volumes of something, an inflated price, then, the alarm bell should go off. Why is this person doing this? They're probably going to scam me.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that, Steve and Mod Sween. So people listening, we're aware of these scams and we are working hard to tackle them. So if you do come across any just mentioned, then obviously send us a report and we can take a look into that. So even I'm getting a little bit confused now. So the average RuneScaper, just logs in and plays RuneScape. They go skidding to do a quest, to do some combat, whatever. They're not kind of thinking about all these potential scams they could come across. I think it's important to mention that scamming isn't every world, everywhere. It's just a core group of people, and a loud minority who actually cause a lot of impact on players. So it's a lot to take in. For me, as I work here, there's a lot to take in for me. So for players who are listening, it's going to be a lot for them to take in as well. So how can people equip themselves with the knowledge and the information they need to make sure they don't fall victim to these various different scams? Mod Sween.
I'd really recommend visiting the scamming prevention guide on the support center. To access this, you go to the RuneScape homepage, click support in the top right, and then you'll see 4 sections, and then click support guides, and then scam prevention guide will be there, one of the top links. And it will cover all the scams we mentioned so far. It's in really kind of communicable language. You'll understand what it is. It's kind of really back to basics. So I'd familiarise yourself with that. And if you follow all the advice there, you will not be scammed. I can promise you that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So education there, really, really important. So, keeping your wits about you, knowing what the scams are is part of it. But Steve, obviously taking out these people in our game who are trying to ruin the experience of others is key too. So what can players do to help us do that?
Yeah, I mean, a really important thing here is if you are unlucky enough to get scammed, and hopefully you've read the Scam Prevention Guide, you've listened to this podcast, you're well equipped and knowledgeable and you won't get scammed. But, if you do, it's really important that you report it to us and report it to us quickly after it's happened. Now, the problem here is when you get scammed, you sort of go into panic mode. How am I going to get this thing back? How do I contact Jagex? You're worrying about how much you've lost, how you fell for it. You probably feel a bit stupid as well, particularly if it's something, like a fairly simple scam. You've dropped something on the floor and someone's picked it up, for example. You probably feel a bit dumb about that and don't want to shout about it. You haven't got any wits about you, but actually, let common sense kick in. For us to take action, we need a report. Hit the report on the player. Let us that will get us evidence. When we're looking at this in a couple of days' time, and we're trying to put things right and sort things out, we need that evidence. Screenshots don't help us. They can be doctored and changed. Even people with good intent want to supply us with screenshots, but we can't take them as evidence. It's not from our systems. We need a report generated in RuneScape, and we need it quickly after it's happened. So we've captured all the evidence. Okay. So all the other things you might be thinking about, how am I going to get my stuff back? How am I going to rebuild my bank? Put that to one side for a moment and just think, what do I need to do right here in the moment? And that's actually report it so that we can actually deal with it and take action.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And so I think the phrase which underlines all of this scamming prevention advice is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I think we all kind of should keep that phrase fresh in our minds. But I think that's been a really useful podcast, actually, and it's good to get insight into the work we do behind the scenes to tackle that scamming, both the low level and that high level organised scamming. And hopefully people listening to this podcast will have a better understanding of exactly what we do and how we work. If anyone's got any feedback or questions or comments, then let us know by tweeting at JagXSupport. Alternatively, we're on the forums and on social media too, things like Reddit. So as Steve said earlier, any suggestions on how we can help prevent scamming, post a thing on Reddit and we'll take a look at that as well. But I guess from us, it's goodbye. So it's bye from me, Mod Infinity.
Goodbye from me. Thanks for listening from Mod Steve W.
And it's goodbye from me, Mod Sween.
Right, bye.
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 Thanks for listening, and be sure to catch us next time. Bye.